I had two Chinese movies to pick from, and I think I picked the wrong one, because this one really wasn't my cup of tea. That's not to say it was terrible, but the whole tone and the feel of the movie was just very, I don't know, unusual. I'm not sure how else to describe it, but it didn't really do much for me. At very few points did it actually get me excited or interested in what was going on. That being said, it is a good looking movie for the most part. The cinematography and the production design in this is really good. All the sets and costumes are pretty much gorgeous, so I gotta give it that. However, the color palette is very grey. There's some black and white too, but overall the whole thing is just different shades of grey. And while that is aesthetically pleasing, it does get a bit boring. And I feel like it could have used a little bit more color, strategically placed here and there. But as I said, it does look good. And it was very clearly an artistic choice, not incompetence. Now, there is some slightly dodgy CGI here and there, but for the most part that's not really an issue. And an interesting thing about this is that it takes a pretty minimalist approach. Most scenes take place within a very few sparse sets, which I didn't even think about at the time. There is a big spectacle sequence at one point, where clearly most of the money was spent, and I can't say I minded that. I thought that part was fairly enjoyable actually. But yeah, most of the movie takes place within a couple of rooms, and I would actually call this a political thriller set in ancient China. And it's mainly about this shadow, who's essentially a body double. He's pretending to be someone influential to keep the real person safe. But it's also about these two kingdoms, or whatever you'd call them, that are essentially heading towards conflict, and both sides are trying to resolve it. But at the same time, they both seem pretty keen to actually just fight it out too. So you have these kings and princesses and commanders and whatnot, and they're plotting and planning and trying to come out ahead. That's the basic idea here, and I usually like political thrillers. But as I said, this one just didn't do very much for me. And most of that is probably because I just didn't care for any of the characters. They weren't that interesting or compelling, and the general story wasn't that great either. I mean, you have this Chinese King Joffrey type, who's basically power tripping. And he's just sort of obnoxious and annoying. Not my favorite character. And then you have this princess who's just sort of there in the background for most of the movie. Well, turns out she's actually one of the more interesting characters later on, for about 2 minutes. And then of course we have this shadow guy, who's pursuing something. He's got his mind set on a certain goal. And all of that makes sense, but he's about as interesting as a piece of cardboard too. So there just wasn't much for me to latch on to and get invested in. And at a few points I was genuinely bored with it. It just completely failed to engage me. But as I said, I liked the big spectacle. I thought it was pretty creative. And some of the fight choreography was great too, so there's that. But for the majority of the movie I was just pretty disinterested, to be honest. I'm also not sure what the whole point was, or what it was trying to say, if anything at all. But I have a strong feeling the whole yin-yang thing had something to do with it. That symbolism was pretty strong throughout the whole movie. And this is where I'd insert a clip from Full Metal Jacket if I wanted a copyright strike. But other than that, I don't have very much to say about this one. I can't call it outright bad, but it definitely wasn't for me. And I can't really call it that good either. But would I recommend it? No, I think it's pretty safe to skip. Or don't, I'm not your Royal Highness. But I am trying to sell out, so consider liking, subbing, hitting that bell and supporting me on Patreon. Because I really need to get myself some ancient Chinese armor. And hey, why not drop a comment below or check out another review? I'd appreciate it. Thanks.